we go. Sweet. Okay, so yeah, Terry asked me to talk about React today, and I kind of jumped at it, and she asked for a list of tags that she wanted, so I threw in a bunch of things like UI and UX and functional programming, and I kind of got ahead of myself because I realized while working on this, but what I should really be thinking about is getting real human beings building a real life app. Because that's the beauty of React, is you can kind of jump into it and actually be building something fun very quickly. So this talk is subtitled More Than Just UI. And what I mean by that is, for me, React has kind of become, it's more than just a library. It's a hobby for me. It's actually a way for me to put food on the table at home. And I think it's something that you guys are going to really like. So I'm just going to jump into it here. So what are we going to talk about? I like to remind myself what I actually put in these slides before I get going. So otherwise, I'll just get lost pretty quick. So how does React fit in with the web? So as was said before, the web is pretty complicated, big, and scary place these days. And so I guess what we really need to address in this talk is what slice of that stack does React belong in? So I'm going to address that kind of off the top. I'm also going to talk about why we should use it. It's become really popular. There's a lot of hype about it these days, but I think some of that hype is deserved, and I'd like to discuss why. We're going to go over the basics of React. So I'm actually going to do a bit of live coding because I feel like I can code better than I can talk. And we're also going to talk about what you can do after you get the basics down. So there's a big community in React, and I think it's the best place to start. But we'll get there at the end. So anyways, what are we not going to talk about? So I'm not going to talk about framework comparison. 2 reasons. 1, I don't know enough, and 2, I don't want to start any battles because there's a lot going on. It seems like every few months there's another JavaScript framework. I think they're all valid, and really I'm just gonna. I think getting through the basics of React in 25 minutes is gonna be enough on its own. And then I'm not gonna get into advanced concepts either because I don't think they really belong in a talk. And again, 25 minutes. I'm gonna be pressed as it is to get through it all. So I am going to use a bunch of terms, and I want to make sure everyone's at least on the same page. I know that everyone here has at least an interest in code if they're not actively making money coding every day right now. So I'm just going to talk about a few things that we need to have a basic understanding of. So HTML in the DOM and CSS. So HTML, I'm sure everyone is aware of it if they don't use it every day. The hypertext markup language is a way to structure a document on the web where each node in that structure represents a piece of the view that you're looking at. So that's called the document object model. And CSS, or cascading style sheets, is a way for us to take that DOM and style it to look like the web apps that we all use every day. So next up is JavaScript. So JavaScript is a programming language. A lot of people say it is a scripting language, and I disagree with them. But it was invented by Brendan Eich when he was working at Netscape Navigator back in 1995. He actually coded the prototype for it in 10 days, which is probably the cause of why there's so many funny things in it. So ECMAScript is a term that's often conflated with JavaScript. And so ECMAScript is really, it's a standard. And so again, Brendan Eich came along and laid out the first standard. And so the European, I have it written down here, what ECMA stands for. It's not the East Coast Music Awards. It's the European Computer Manufacturers Association. So they're a standards organization. And so they manage the roadmap of features that are going to be included in JavaScript in the future. And so as developers, we obviously want to take advantage of these features. And so what we need to do is we actually need to transpile ECMAScript into JavaScript. And so transpilation. It's the process of just taking a piece of code and reproducing equivalent code in another language. So that's common in the world of web development, especially in JavaScript. And so you see it all over the place, and a very popular library for doing that is Babel. So we're going to talk about Babel, and we're going to use Babel to take future features in ECMAScript and transpile them into JavaScript so that we can deploy them in production apps. So React in the web ecosystem. Here we go. One at a time, please. All right. So the React homepage has this right at the top, a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. And in my opinion, they are massively selling themselves short, because React really offers the same kind of solutions that you would expect from a fully fledged framework. And what's kind of beautiful about it is that these solutions aren't from the React team themselves, but they're from the community that's been built up around it. And so what you see is devs that are happy with the product that they're using build features, and then users respond to those features, and you kind of get this beautiful feedback loop where the tools that are used in the React world are the ones that arise organically because they work well, and because people like to build them and people like to use them. And so a big part of React is that it doesn't, like I said at the beginning, have much of an opinion about how you build your apps. It just gives you the UI, and then you can respond to that. And so because of that, it has this sort of organic growth of the libraries and the tools that are used in the React community. Another thing that's really great about React is that it does have such a reputation for really stable releases. React was developed and is still maintained at Facebook. And despite how you may or may not feel about the organization, they do have about 50,000 components that they use to test every new feature on. So by the time things are rolled out into a new release, they're well thought out and usually free of bugs and the like. And then React is also really widely used by a lot of successful apps. So some of the big ones are Netflix and Airbnb and Twitter and Instagram, Facebook, obviously. And these are all using React. I think even the new Office suite, which I recently started using, I was really impressed with how well it was working, and I looked it up and I realized it was built in React. And I was like, oh, this makes sense, that's great. Slack, all kinds of them, VS Code, they're all built in React. So, oh, look at that, everything's out of order. I'm just gonna, sure, why should we use React? So React uses a declarative programming paradigm. So this kind of comes back to that unopinionated nature, where instead of an imperative style, it leaves the implementation of the code up to the developer, which I'm a big fan of. Another really great thing about it is it uses composable components. So in React, especially now with the introduction of hooks, every piece of your view on the screen is literally a function. You declare this function and you call it with some input parameters, and it returns the actual visual UI that your users are going to see and work with. And the entire app is that. And that's it. That's all it is. It's just a big bunch of functions calling each other and updating. And so the way it manages that is through a really efficient and consistent component lifecycle. So React, the most expensive part of that life cycle is actually committing HTML to the DOM. And so React keeps a virtual version of the DOM in memory and makes the changes there, and then uses a very efficient diffing algorithm to check if its virtual DOM has anything different with the DOM on the screen. And when it detects that, it only updates the changes that it needs to. So it keeps it a very efficient and very reactive UI. And then learn once, write anywhere. Again, coming from the website. When they said this, they were referring to React Native, which is another project using the same syntax and the same basic coding principles that you can develop native apps, for iOS and for Android. Anyway, so and the other thing that's great about React is it doesn't care where your data is coming from. All it cares about is the state of your app. So you could take code that you have right now and start migrating over to React, because all it builds for you is the UI, and you can choose how to integrate it with everything else. So we're going to go into the basics of React. I'm going to just get into a bit of HTML and CSS. And I'm only going to go into the bare minimum of setting up a React app. So it's just going to be the required HTML and JavaScript just to get something on the screen. we'll come back a bit later and talk more about something that you might actually want to do for like, your first project or something you actually use in production. But this is the HTML. This is all the HTML you actually need to spin up your first little React app. I mean, it's bare bones, right? Like we're talking nothing here. I don't even think you could get it to anything to appear on the screen without that. And then what React actually does is this little node here, it's going to mount itself there, and it's going to use JavaScript to update all of the HTML that's going to appear on the user. It's going to take things away, it's going to update them, it's going to add new components, and it's all just going to mount inside that one div. So it's pretty neat. And then so here's the basic JavaScript for it. So I've included a little script tag here, and you can see I've got this React DOM render. So this is a method that comes from the React DOM library, and that's where that render method is what takes care of actually initializing the virtual DOM and then maintaining it as state changes. And what I've done inside sorry, my kid gave me a cold before I came here. The React DOM render method takes an element and an actual DOM node from the screen. So you can see I'm just using this vanilla JavaScript here, document.element by ID, and I'm grabbing that root element, which we declared before, right? Here we go. Grabbing that one right there. And then we're using this react.createElement function. So this one it's pretty straightforward and pretty self-explanatory. It's going to create an h1 tag. It's not going to have any characteristics, and it's just going to contain the text hello world. So we do need to talk about a couple little things that React does. It likes to break the rules, and so do I. The first one is HTML in JavaScript, and my favorite emoji. So it's not technically HTML in JavaScript, but it definitely looks that way. And so I'm going to go over that a bit and what JSX is in the next slide, and in the basics. And then on top of that, React couples your UI with your business logic. And so I think everyone who kind of went through that MVC style building things was always taught, no, you need to keep your business logic and your view separate. But React really adopts the idea that your UI and your business logic are so tightly coupled and they belong together. And so React actually maintains such an efficient UI lifecycle because of this fact. And we'll get into that as well. But the first thing we're going to address is our HTML and JavaScript, but not really. So I've got two pieces of code here. On the left is basically the code we saw before. The only change I've made is where before this was null because it had no properties. Now we're just saying, hey, we're going to have a style property and it's going to be colored red. Other than that, we've just got this react.createElement method. And so over here, what we have is what looks like HTML. We're creating an h1 tag. It has a style attribute of color red, and it contains the text hello world. So you can see how one matched to the other. Now what this is it's called JSX. And again, maintained at Facebook. It's never intended to be implemented into JavaScript. All it is syntactic sugar. It's just a way for a developer to be able to maintain their node structure in a familiar way. And it becomes, once you start nesting these components inside one another, it becomes a lot more maintainable to read it as JSX than it does to read it as create element calls containing create element calls containing create element calls. And it would just get a bit messy as you drill down. So demo time. I'm going to sit down for this. Also, I'll probably fall over. And we're going to do a bit of live coding. So I made a little code sandbox here. And I'm going to try and share these slides at the end so everyone who's interested can go back and do it. And so what I've done is I've set up a basic HTML thing again. I've got a few more meta tags here at the top, and I'm bringing in some the actual React library from Unpackage. But essentially, we're dealing with the same thing. And again, down here, we've got our div, which is going to be our root where everything's inserted. And then we're just actually calling the React library here. So you can see, yeah, probably. I don't know how. I'm going to figure it out, though. How's that? Bigger?
You made it big. Yeah.
What's that? Yes. Okay. So we've got this this div here, which is where we're going to insert all of our actual view over on the right. And then down here, we're saying React DOM, we're going to render our h1 tag. And we can come along here and we can say, you know, we can just change our text just to show you that it's actually doing it. There we go, right? But that's not very impressive. We don't really care about that. What we want to do is we want to start using our JSX. So I was smart, and rather than typing in front of you all I have to do is uncomment some code. So now I've got my JSX here. So I'm going to save this, and it's going to error out. And the reason it's going to error out is because it says, hey, unexpected token, this is not JavaScript, and it's right. So we need to transpile it using Babel. So I'm bringing in Babel, and the only other change I need to make is instead of this script being text JavaScript, it's going to be text Babel. And we come back and we've got our hello world again, right? So this is essentially how JavaScript or how React is working. So this is a very basic example just to kind of get the principles of what's happening up on the screen in front of you. So we're going to come back here. So the other thing I talked about was putting our business logic and our UI or view in the same place. So where before we were just mounting an h1 tag, what we're now going to declare is a component. So this is kind of the next step, the next logical step. We want to be able to declare our own little piece of UI. So it's not just an h1, it's going to be something else. In our case, it's going to be a text box. And like I said, every piece of view in React is just a function. So we declare our text box function. We've got some stuff going on here, and we're going to return an input. Just like I said, it's a function, it returns UI. So now we've got some other things going on in the middle here. So React has these great little pieces of utility called hooks. And what hooks let you do is actually hook in to the React component lifecycle. And so this hook uses state. So when this hook is mounted, it lets React know, hey, this piece of UI is going to have state that needs to be responded to. So the useState hook takes an initial value for your state right here. So in our case, we've just got this constant initial text, just an empty string. So the initial state is going to be an empty string, and it returns an array. So this array, this is some ECMAScript 6 here. It's array destructured. So the actual return value of useState here is an array with 2 items, and I'm naming them text and set text. Text is the actual state value that we're going to have in our component. And set text is an updater function that lets the React component lifecycle know that something has changed. So I can come down here, and you're going to see in my input, the actual value of my input is going to be this text state. And when this input changes, we're going to handle change. And that's a little function I've declared here. So it's going to take an event from the DOM, and we're going to set our text to the value from that event. And then when we change our input, i.e. we start typing in our username or password, React is going to maintain that state inside the component. So again, just to kind of dive into it a little more, we're going to do a demo. So this one is a little bit different. This time what I've actually done is I've spun up something on Code Sandbox, and what it is create React app. So this is a really great starting point. Again, it's a little library maintained by Facebook. All it does is spin up kind of the boilerplate code that you need to have a basic Node application using React. It handles all of your Webpack bundling for you. It handles all of your transpilation for you. It's a really great way to kind of get into it. And actually, it's used all the time in production. A lot of people are building their modern apps using Create React app. So coming back over here, anyone is familiar with Node? How many people are using Node at all in the room? Just show of hands. Okay, good. We've got a good group of people here. So as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. We've got some scripts, some dev dependencies and dependencies. All we're bringing in right now is React and React DOM. And this React script comes with that Create React app. It just handles all of our development mode and bundling and everything else. Anyways, so we come in here, and this should look pretty familiar. So this is our index file. And all we're doing is, again, we're calling that React DOM.render method. We mount a component and an element. So this root element, you can see I'm doing the same thing. I'm just using some vanilla JavaScript, grabbing that node that says root, right from my index.html file, right? So a lot of this stuff is very similar. The only difference here is this one has a no script tag in case someone turns off their JavaScript. It just lets them know this is not going to work without it, right? So we come back in here, and we're using this import syntax. Again, ECMAScript 6. We're transpiling it over to JavaScript, but it's fairly declarative, which I like about it. Import React from React. It's pretty straightforward. So then we can come into our app here. And so this is what we're actually mounting to the screen. And so there we go. So we've got an H1 tag. It says React 101, and we've got a P tag, and it shows some cool stuff already. So what I've decided we're going to do here is we're going to build an app that changes between light mode and dark mode, because that's really hot these days. So I've got some basic CSS here, and you can see down at the bottom, I've got one that's app. And if you have a node that's app and dark mode, I really love this little thing here. You can see if you have an element with a class of app and it has the class of dark mode, it just switches the colors out. So we should be able to do that right now. I should be able to come in here and say dark mode and save this. And look, it switches to dark mode just like that, right? So all we need to do is manage that in React. So very quickly here, we're going to need some state. So first I'll have to bring in that use state hook from the React library. So I come over here to my import statement, and I'm using some destructuring here, and I'm saying I want use state, because I need to use state. And so we're going to say down here, we've got some constants. Remember, the return value of use state is going to be an array. We're going to say use state. And it's going to need an initial value. So we're going to say initial value equals false. I didn't even make a typo yet. This is crazy. Okay. So our state's initial value is going to be false. And so what we're going to call this state, you can call it anything. You can say state and set state if you want, right? But that's not very descriptive. In our case, what we want to say is we're going to say dark mode, right? Because that's what we care about. We're going to say set dark mode. So this dark mode is just going to be that Boolean value that we set here. So I should be able to come over here and make a little ternary statement. I should be able to say, all right, if it's dark mode, then return the string dark mode. I'm going to want a space in front of that. And then otherwise, we're just going to return an empty string. Right? So far, this should work and nothing should change. Awesome. If I set this initial value to true, we should make sure that it changes to dark mode. And it does. Look at that. Fancy. Oh, there's my first typo. Nice. All right, so we've got this thing going. So now what we need to do is we need to have something that handles this set dark mode. So I've gone ahead and I've written some of this stuff out already. So I'm just going to bring this over. I'm going to bring in a little components folder. And inside that, I'm going to put this toggle component that I built. And so this toggle component, I guess I should probably start from scratch just to be a little more clear what's going on here. This toggle component, I basically stole it from W3 Schools because that's what real developers do. They steal other people's code. So it's a really simple toggle switch, right? They've got the HTML here. They've got the CSS. I said, yep, that's good enough for me. So I came back, and as you can see here, I've got the HTML that they had on the screen. I've got the same CSS. So all I really need to do is I need to import React so I can use the React stuff. I import that CSS right here. You can see it's a little relative path here. And so what I've got is my toggle is going to return that same thing. And so the next kind of thing about React is we can use state like we did with a hook, but child components can also receive state from their parents. And when we pass that down, we call that props. All right? That I don't know why we call it props. We just do. We're just going to deal with it. And so what I've got here is I'm going to destructure from my props an isChecked Boolean and a setIsChecked callback function. All right? So we can see my input has its checked value is going to be based off that state that we're bringing in from props. And we're going to have an onClick function, which is going to set isChecked, and it's just going to toggle it. Right? So we should be able to save this and save this. And now I should be able to come back to my app here, and I should be able to import that component. So I'm going to say import toggle from and components. Yes, that's what I want. Toggle. There it is. So now I've got my toggle component that I just built, and I should be able to come here, and I'm going to put it right in here. I'm going to say, hey, I want my toggle. So this should at least mount the toggle. So now the toggle is mounted, and I'm going to click it, and everything's going to blow up because I didn't pass anything into this toggle. So remember, this toggle is a function, right? And this function receives props. So I need to pass in something for isChecked and setIsChecked. So I can do that right here. I can say isChecked is going to be equal to dark mode, because that's what we care about. And I should say setIsChecked is equal to set dark mode. Now if I save this, I should check this and it should change to dark mode. Oh, it worked. Okay, amazing. So this is kind of the entry to React, and it's just giving you an example of what it can do, right? And to me, the first time I saw this, I almost died because it's just so great. So we're gonna come back over here to my so that was the demo, essentially. Okay, so where to go next? Now that we know how React works and we're all experts in it, what do we do? What's the next thing to do? So join the community. That's what needs to happen. We need more people developing. We need more people writing code and contributing. There can't ever be enough, Stack Overflow answers because, like, honestly, as a developer, I'm basically just an overpaid Google user. And podcasts, we need more people making podcasts, listening to podcasts. So I really want people to just get out there and join the community. In Halifax, we have a pretty good community of React developers. There's a React meetup every so often. There's one next month on February 18th at Volta Labs. You guys should come down. And so I've also included a list of resources here for anyone who's interested. Again, I'm going to share these slides. I'll just post them on Twitter. And anyone can go on there and steal my code and use my slides. I have no shame, nor do I care. So these resources are great. Every one of these I've used and found them to be a really great learning tool or a really great way to keep up with React. How's my time? What am I doing? 5 minutes for questions. Sweet. Okay, let's do that. 5 minutes for questions. Does anyone have questions? Yes?
Can you use TypeScript with React?
Absolutely, yes you can. Yep. So again, TypeScript is really just like a superset of JavaScript, right? So at the end of the day, it just compiles down to JavaScript. And so it's actually become really popular in the React communities to start using TypeScript, especially when you have a huge application. That's where TypeScript really shines. And where all of your components are just functions, you can make sure that you're passing in the right types. So it becomes a really great tool for maintaining a huge library. So there's I've heard the argument that there's a bit of overhead setting up TypeScript on a project. I don't know. I feel differently about it because I really like TypeScript, and yeah, it comes right in it. And in fact, in that demo that I had, yeah, exactly. So yeah, it comes with it. So yeah, absolutely, you can use it. Anyone else? Yeah.
I heard through the grapevine, and this might be incorrect, that breadsticks is an Angular shell.
That is so not true.
It's not true.
Not even close to true.
Okay.
I don't know how to write Angular.
Okay.
I've done like the Hello World whatever tutorial, but.
So will you switch to React in a replacement?
No, we do all kinds of stuff. We do iOS, we do Android, we do a lot of web. So there's a lot of web. I'm a React developer. There's quite a few React developers there. There are Angular developers there. We have people building voice apps in Dialogflow and the AWS one. Oh, it's just Alexa. Yeah, and we have like a whole DevOps team, and we actually have people building Roku apps. We have all kinds of stuff. There's even a small game department, and we're actually kind of growing a 3D department, but I don't know what they do because it's a big secret. They're in this room. They all need to have like security clearances. Yeah. Yeah.
What are the major obstacles? Like, what do you see people stumble over when they pick up React and start using it? They bang their heads against it.
Yeah, for sure. Getting your head kind of in the React way can be a bit of a stumbling block. Like starting to think in JSX rather than thinking in JavaScript, because the hard thing to maintain is while it looks like HTML, it is very much so still JavaScript. And so you'll see in my CSS here, I've got everything named class name. I can't use class because class is actually a reserved word in JavaScript. So they kind of rename a bunch of the HTML tags to kind of overcome that. So that's a bit of a stumbling block that I definitely had in getting my head wrapped around that. You know, I guess the thing that people kind of get worked up with the most as well is this thing called prop drilling. So you can imagine if you have a large app with a lot of components, there's going to be a lot of nesting going on. And maybe some component way down the tree requires access to state that's maintained way up the tree. And so you need to start passing that state down and bubbling it back up. And so that becomes a little bit of a headache. And there are lots of different ways that you can go about doing that, but that's starting to get into some more advanced concepts for sure. And I've definitely got resources here for getting into that stuff. I don't think I included anything on Redux because I kind of have a love-hate relationship with Redux. Lately, it's been a lot of hate. But anyway, yeah. So those are definitely some things that I've seen.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.